everyone. Welcome to the Preemie Chats. Preemie Chat is our weekly educational sessions for healthcare professionals and parents to talk about what matters to you, to explore new ideas, and to learn together. I'm Fabiana Bacchini. I'm a Preemie parent and executive director of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation, as known as CPBF, and I'm happy to be your host today. CPBF is a parent-led organization that helps families in and after the ICU through education, support, and advocacy. If you have a heart for preemies, whether you're a family or a healthcare professional, please check our website, canadianpreemies.org. There you'll find resources, the latest projects, and most importantly, a community of people who wants to see our little babies thrive. And if you're watching this session live today, please bring your voice to this table. Leave comments and questions in the chat, and we'll try to address them during our program. It is through rich conversations like this we can advance practice and learn together. So please participate and let us know where you're watching us from. And now on today's topic, we're going to talk about hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy. Our guest will talk about Hope for HIE, a nonprofit patient advocacy group dedicated to improving the quality of life of children and families impacted by HIE. She will discuss the growth of the organization and the support it provides for families in Canada and beyond, as well as involvement in accelerating research for the HIE population. And I have here joining us live from Detroit, United States, Betsy Pilon, who is the Executive Director of Hope for HIE, the premier global nonprofit patient advocacy group dedicated to improving the quality of life for children and families impacted by neonatal and pediatric-acquired HIE through awareness, education, and support. After her son Max was born in 2012 with HIE, it was difficult to find educational resources or connection with other families. Eventually, Betsy found a small group of families gathering on social media. Working with the existing group, she led the efforts to start the grassroots nonprofit foundation in 2013. Betsy served on the board of the directors of the Newborn Brain Society, as well as many neonatal and neurology-related work groups, task forces, and committees elevating the lived experience of the HIE community through patient advocacy. Betsy, thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm very grateful that you are here because we do have a lot of parents that spend time in that ICU in our group whose baby were not preterm, but were in the ICU because HIE, and I feel this is such an important topic and also amazing work that you're doing that we need to spread around the world. So I will let you share your presentation. And for all of you watching us live, please ask your questions and make comments, share your experiences that we're going to address at the end of Betsy's presentation. Betsy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me today and bringing HIE some additional awareness. We have an incredible Canadian family group of support all across all provinces. And I have a close affinity for Canada in general, as I'm 20 minutes away and grew up on CBC. So really excited to be here today and so thankful for the opportunity. I'm going to, dive in a little bit about our organization, but also want to call attention to February being Full-Term Awareness Month. And HIE does impact across all gestations, but primarily the initial HIE would be more related to full-term babies. So we'll get into a little bit about the organization and what HIE is. It's the second leading cause of infant mortality worldwide and a leading cause of lifelong disability. There are multiple causes, which makes, let's start from the big overview and see how quickly we get in the weeds about it. These can happen in utero, at birth, after. Common causes are placental issues like a placental abruption or uterine rupture, fetal maternal hemorrhage, shoulder dystocia, cord compression and cord issues, and then after birth, near SIDS events and cardiac arrest can lead because it restricts oxygen and blood flow to the brain. It occurs in high-income countries, 2 to 3 per 1,000 live births about, and 10 to 20 per 1,000 live births in low and middle income countries. All that to say, there are different presentations of HIE, mild, moderate, and severe at birth, and we have a strong hunch that mild is vastly undercounted. Because the focus has primarily been on moderate to severe babies because they're in the most need of support. Typically, HIE babies are born very sick. And I said it, pretty much the majority impacts near and full-term babies. HIE is a leading cause of neonatal seizures, but not all HIE babies will have neonatal seizures. So it's important to make that distinction. The HIE NICU journey is a little bit unique. Babies, and this is, I think, any of us families that go through, a NICU stay, everything is, you're cruising along, you have appointments, maybe something's picked on the appointment, maybe it's not, and you're going through the messaging out there around NICU is that, you're in a safe zone after you get to a certain gestation. And so for our families that are full term, it's definitely not, not the safe zone for their experience. So, we have a similar pathway of going into the NICU. There is currently only one therapeutic intervention for HIE, and that is therapeutic hypothermia or brain cooling. And that has been standard of care for just over a decade now. And that process has to be initiated within 6 hours of the baby being born. They have to be a certain gestational age to qualify because there's data that is emerging that there's worse outcomes for babies that are under 35 weeks gestation. And so they're looking into that a lot more clearly. And it helps the buckets. And I'm sure, those of you that are involved in research and looking at outcome measurement and things like that, the two buckets of research and outcome measurement is neural developmental impairment and mortality, so death and disability. So cooling has reduced death and disability, but there's still a long way to go. And again, cooling, when we talk about resourcing, it's not available everywhere. It takes a lot of resources to have it work. And then in low and middle income countries, there's been some evidence that shows because of the maternal care or lack thereof, that it might actually make outcomes worse in some low and middle income countries that might have it as well. So lots of things to consider about that. So babies are in cooling that do qualify for about 72 hours. They have one 12-hour period where they go down into cooling, and then they're there for 72 hours, and then they have a period of warm up. During that time, initially, everyone thought that it was not feasible to hold or feed during cooling, but there are studies that are showing that that is feasible for some babies, and a great QI project for any NICUs that want to take that on. And then really between days 5 and 7 is typically when HIE babies will get an MRI. And that's really the first peek at the brain from a structure standpoint. All of them have been on EEG during cooling or upon arrival to the NICU or throughout, as another piece to the puzzle because it is a neurological impact. First holds, like I said, it's still wide variability of when babies can be held. But we're really hoping that in this next push of advocacy that people will look to NICUs that are showing that holding is safe and feasible. And it's not going to be holding like you think of with kangaroo care, but even just having those babies in cooling close to their parents shows that cortisol levels drop for both mom and baby. NICU duration, HIE babies can sometimes have a very short duration, so just a few days. So 5 days, and some have lengthy stays up to hundreds of days. It really depends on the impacts from HIE with the babies in their NICU course. So they typically get to discharge and there's a gap of care, as this is very common with all NICU families that I know we're all trying to work on, but you get to discharge and then you're like, okay, here's all the things you need to know and go. And it can be very unsettling for families as they get home, especially families that have experienced neonatal seizures. There's a lot of anxiety around, if my baby seizes, what, will happen? Who do I call? How do I elevate this to get care? And so then we move into kind of the NICU, post-NICU support phase. And this is where I know we are arm in arm in working our hardest to make sure families have not only that support in the NICU, but as they transition home and longitudinally, especially for the many ways that HIE can impact babies. I mentioned about cooling. So there's, a little bit more detail, and again, looking at the QI that can be done, looking at the feasibility of more widespread holding and feeding. So the common experiences that HIE families tend to talk about, HIE is very isolating. Resources traditionally have tended to be very prematurity focused versus neurological. There's also a lot of cultural stigmas that can exist about disability, being seen as taboo, that, these babies, like in neonatology, we find a lot of bias sometimes of why families might not get the same equity of support or education about the diagnosis. And sometimes it's related to the fact that it just makes people uncomfortable that we don't really have a fix for this. We have one therapy, like I mentioned, but it's still very difficult to talk about potential impacts. And there's just a lot of uncertainty with the diagnosis of how a baby will develop after their NICU course. Again, this is unexpected. Families are usually unaware that HIE exists or is a possibility regardless of resourcing. Whether you're in a high-income country or a rural area, it's really just not something that most people know about. We all have this need for connection, and families learn from one another, and we have a need for prevention and therapies, as I mentioned, and again, the long-term outcome ambiguity. So regardless of how a baby may present at birth of that mild, moderate, severe, the tricky thing about HIE is sometimes you're going to know like how a child is going to be impacted, potentially very quickly, if they need extra interventions. But many times our families don't know until school age or later. And especially with neonatal seizures, that puts babies at risk for developing epilepsy, a higher percentage than the average population. And there are situations, my own included, where babies will not have seizures for many, many years. So it's just the getting comfortable in the uncomfortable ambiguity of outcomes and not knowing. Just some of the long-term impacts. The NICU for our families, like I said, is really just the beginning. HIE is a catalyst diagnosis that can cause many different types of diagnoses. Cerebral palsy, epilepsy, like I mentioned. In particular, HIE is one of the leading causes of lots of the rare epilepsy syndromes, so infantile spasms and ESES, which is now it's a spike wave in sleep. There's Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, all sorts of really not fun epilepsies. And then in general, epilepsy is higher in our population. Secondary microcephaly, so obviously if the brain is impacted, it's harder to grow at a normal rate with tissue that's been injured. And so that's very common and sometimes a very large worry of our families because they'll start looking to see what that might mean and they come across a different diagnosis that is not associated. Learning and attention issues, autism, behavioral challenges, hearing issues, vision issues, really kind of any way that the body can be impacted. This is where we are located. We do have a presence all over the world. We have, I think this goes with some populations, some access to internet, where people are, but we have over 9,000 families in our community today from over 100 countries. On our team, we have a small but mighty staff. I'm the executive director and have been proudly serving since December 2020. We have a wonderful program manager. We have a licensed social worker, a certified child life specialist, part-time admin support, intern support, and we're also onboarding a clinical research coordinator this year. Really excited about that. We have an incredible credentialed board who has been supporting us for a long time. We have a multidisciplinary medical advisory board that also includes clinicians that are HIE parents, which brings a lot of really great perspective. And then we also have Partners in Hope that help sustain our mission. We created, because HIE is so complex and the terminology is medical jargon and really tricky, so we created a website to make it easy. It's a redirect that people can just type in HIE debt support, and this gets you to our main support program and service page. We have a request form that people can fill out, referrals, so hospitals can refer families through this, and hit that submit request, fill it out. We're a part of the Child Neurology Foundation's Neurological Social Services Network, which gives us access to a wonderful platform to help connect families to different programs and services that we have or that another organization might have. And on the right-hand side of that website is our list of services and support across all ages, stages, outcomes, impacts, and how families can learn more about that and how they can get connected in. And then we have these support packages that are both support materials and educational materials. We're always trying to build health literacy, because this is such a complex diagnosis with so much uncertainty, and causation is so complicated as well. So we try to break this down, and we feel it's very important for families to have accurate medical information in their first language. So we have these, they go out to NICUs all across Canada, all across the world, and families get a little hug of hope for their journey, get connected. They can write down things in a journal, and just kind of break down the terminology and their experience a little bit more. And then our long-term support resources that we have, I mentioned before that this is across all ages and outcomes. HIE, unfortunately, is such a significant cause of infant mortality. So we have extensive bereavement and loss support. We have sibling support. We have demographic support. We're worldwide. We're accessible. We also are starting support for our kids this year. Who would have thought, right? What's tricky with, I think, a lot of these neonatal experiences is that, we start and we're the ones, like, I say this all the time, babies can't raise themselves. So you have to empower parents through education. And at some point, this is a part of our parenting story, but this is like our kids' whole story. This is their ownership of their journey. And so, it's kind of like the concept of I learn, you learn, we learn, and then the gradual release of responsibility. So our goal as an organization is always to empower families to help empower their kids and have their kids own their stories and seek support. So we're working on launching that this year. We're really excited about that with our child life specialist. And so, like I mentioned before, we have these amazing credentialed professionals that are in our staff. And then we also have a lot of peer support programs. We have a mentorship program, in-person meetups and events all over the world. We were in Vancouver a couple months ago doing an event. We're going to be in Toronto in May. So we're just excited to be able to bring our community together and make meaningful connections. So, it can be a real challenging life. And, not knowing, it's like learning a whole new language and a whole new culture when you are kind of thrown into this. And, just like I think any of us that are in this advocacy and support world, you're trying to do, what you can, where you can, and how best you can to support families. Again, we have these printable resources translated. We have, just basics about HIE, common diagnoses, what the different parts of the brain do, information about infantile spasms, because early identification is so important. And this continues to be a gap area, but is getting much better, which is really exciting to see over the past few years. These are available on our website. Anyone can download them for free. We are also happy to mail them out. And we have educational and support resources that are video-based. Anyone around the world can join in as long as you have an internet connection. And so we have weekly social worker and peer support mentor-led video support groups that are on Zoom. We have one that happened actually earlier today on dental care, something that is not talked about a lot. We often have we have monthly child life services Q&As, and then we also have monthly educational Q&As with peers and professionals. Our medical advisory board series. We're like everyone in the world on all sorts of different platforms. But we try to, communicate about our support groups for the month, before the beginning of the month, and have topics that families have elevated as important to them. And on our website, you can just go to the events tab and find out. Research. I'm excited to talk about this one because this has been a lot of my life the past 18 months in particular. So HIE, like I mentioned, we have had one therapy available and we have so much need for all sorts of, barriers to break down and improvements to be made. And so because we have so many families and we have a rich history of families participating in clinical trials and research studies, I think about the families that opted into these original cooling trials. And cooling sounds like something out of science fiction. It really does. We think about we'd like to, take your baby down several degrees, and you can't hold them, you can't touch them, you can't feed them, and they're really, really sick. And we have a hunch that this might help mitigate brain injury. That sounds crazy to me. And I remember Max wasn't in a research study, but in 2012, this was like the time where we went from, the clinical trials to analyzing the data and then going into clinical practice as best practice. And I remember being consented in and them telling us about this. And I was like, they're like, and we really, the data is showing that it's doing a lot of good work to, decrease the impact of what's happened. And I was like, sure, yeah, let's do that. But it was just such an otherworldly experience to just have your baby on this cooling mat. When you want to have warm cuddles with your baby, it's the total antithesis of what you're thinking your, motherhood's going to start out like. So we are partnering strongly with many different, research groups. I'm really excited. There are people that I hear about almost weekly now that are working on something for HIE from the therapeutic side, either in the neonatal or in childhood. And we need all of it. So it's about time. We are overdue, and I'm excited to see where this takes us. Through this, we've developed what I call the Halo support model, where we center the patient and family. And we know that a lot of times neonatal trials in particular are really tough to run, and attrition can be really high. So families opt out typically because they get to these follow-up appointments and they're like, oh, this feels so overwhelming. And a lot of times, communication can fall through the cracks. Sites might have, turnover in staff. So we try to be the steady Eddie of, what can you be, what's consistent that we can provide that's, support and education about, these follow-ups and about, clinical trials in general. So we, collaborate with a lot of different entities. Really excited again to be here today and collaborate with you to bring some of the information about HIE to the forefront. And, this is my last slide, but I'll talk about this a little bit because in the lower corner, you'll see two boys. They're both named Max, and my Max is on the left. And my friend Rebecca, who I went to college with, her Max is on the right. Both were born on April 23rd, one in 2012 and one in 2013. And both were cooled and both had HIE. My Max is now 11. This was 2 years ago, this picture. And because everyone always asks, how's he doing now? He's not without impact from HIE, but as I like to say, he is living his best life every day. He is in middle school now. He has great friends. He loves basketball, and Metallica is his favorite band. He loves video games and would love to play them all day, every day if we let him. I think, you can see like our whole hope for HIE is regardless of where someone may end up, that there is hope, there is community, there is support. And life is not, like I think a lot of times it can be painted going back to the neonatology side and something that people can't really fix. What we really hope to showcase is that no matter how this turns out, there's community and there's connection, and hope is so much bigger than an outcome and how that's defined. So that is just the overview, and thank you for your attention. I look forward to any questions.
Hi, Betsy. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm going to keep your website here. Such a beautiful message of hope in the end, because my son didn't have HIE, but he does have cerebral palsy because of another brain injury. And I feel every word of what you said in the end about, having this life, a fulfilled life, regardless of this diagnosis that can be so devastating for families in the very early days. So thank you for shining a light on HIE and what is happening. Obviously, a lot of exciting things in research, and I want to start there because this is something that we are also very passionate about here at CPBF, to engage and collaborate with researchers around the world. One question that I have that show up here: how is the stem cells research playing a role in the treatment at the moment?
Well, so stem cells are a tricky thing. And, I think a lot of people, there's a lot of work going on for preemies and stem cells. And there is work going on for HIE and stem cells. There's the Duke trial. There hasn't been as much pickup with, I don't think it's like the mind-blowing outcomes that I think everyone was hoping for. But there are stem cell development happening, both on the preclinical side that's trying to work through the process to go into clinical trials for HIE, as well as, there's additional studies that are about to start. So there's things in the pipeline, and really it's looking at how can this be used? What's the right type of stem cell? There's amazing, we've had one of our Q&As that we had was with a researcher at Monash Institute in Australia. And, that was really insightful to learn about kind of the state of stem cells with neurological injury for both premature and full-term babies. And then also looking at, is there feasibility of, having positive impact of this type of therapy outside of the neonatal period, where everything is so focused on like, they're looking at the mechanisms of, kind of this domino effect and how can we plug in something to stop and repair. But in Canada, actually, so not stem cell, but there is a really exciting paper that recently came out from Dr. Pia Wintermark and her crew. She's based out of McGill University, and she has done some really interesting work that's showing a lot of promise, and hopefully there will be funding to go for a multi-center study. But she did some initial work with not Allegra, wrong thing, Viagra, wrong drug. Yes. And, I think people know it in a few different ways. In the male reproductive world, it's used, and then in pulmonary hypertension, which sometimes it's used in the NICU for, pulmonary hypertension with babies. And there's a lot of efficacy showing that. And so this is looking at the repurposing, and there's promising research in the preclinical and small clinical work that has been done that shows that this could actually repair the brain injury from HIE. So, that's right out of Canada. There's amazing neonatal researchers, as I know, in Canada on newborn brain. And, Dr. Khorshid Mohammed, like all these people that are so dedicated to, to decreasing that impact and improving outcomes. So there's a lot of really exciting work that's being done.
Oh, that is it very good to know. Oh, and obviously, I'm always curious because I'm not a clinician or a researcher, but how they discovered this repurposing of drugs is really fascinating for us to learn about it. So, yes, another question that I have for you. During your presentation, it wasn't very clear to me because I don't know much about HIE. It doesn't seem to be always obvious that this happened, right? And then
Right.
that's a diagnosis of the baby. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, for sure. So, and I'll kind of zoom out a little bit. And HIE falls under a bucket called neonatal encephalopathy. And under that, that's the umbrella, and HIE is a bucket underneath that. And neonatal encephalopathy is, kind of a term I'm just talking about, that a baby has some sort of neurological presentation that is not, in the typical realm that they're looking for. There's encephalopathy of prematurity. There's, HIE is the top cause of neonatal encephalopathy. There's genetic causes. There's metabolic causes. And there is, like I mentioned, a big range of how a baby might present. A lot of times the markers are cord blood gases at birth. So those are done and analyzed within the first hour. And that's a part of the criteria for cooling. If you are above a certain threshold, you may hit some concern levels on the mild side, but we haven't done widespread clinical trials yet to know if cooling mild babies is effective. And so, because the focus area, where do you focus most for starting these trials when you have limited resources? You're going to focus on the most affected, which would be the moderate to severe presentations. And I also think there was a little bit of a disconnect of the definition of long-term, and that, a lot of times in neonatology, the follow-up only goes to like age 2 or 3. And for these kids that are more on that mild side, they, like I mentioned in the beginning, like could have impacts into school age and beyond that don't show up until like the frontal lobe gets going and executive functioning, expectations are there. And so, there will be some that are diagnosed with mild HIE, but there are probably more. I mean, and we're going to be finding out. There's a multi-center study in the US and in Ireland called the CoolPrime study. You can go to coolprime.org and learn more about it. But it is, looking at answering this question of, what about these mild babies? And what I think is really interesting, because we're an organizational partner on that, is looking at these babies that present and the criteria that they've set for this trial, and how many babies if they are presenting in more that mild encephalopathic way. And there's a amazing neonatal nurse practitioner named Kathy Randall, who's on our medical advisory board. She's kind of dubbed them the maybe babies, where you're like, are they okay? Or is there something more going on? And what is that hunch? And so part of the study is when they meet this criteria, they're putting EEG on them. And it's going to be really interesting to see how many babies have that EEG that doesn't look typical, and how many will go on to seize later. Because we have a lot of kids. This has been a gap area for HIE, is you have a lot of kids that might be born in, need to be resuscitated, but then they bounce back really quick. And then you're like, well, is there an impact, associated with that? And there's no tracking of that data anywhere. So that's another, interesting rabbit hole to dig down. But for those babies that, do and that recover, with APGARs and things like that, and are above where the cutoff would be for cooling, we know that there's a cohort of babies that will go on to have seizures 12 to 24 hours later. And then it's too late to cool because the parameters are 6 hours. So there's just a lot of, again, there's no shortage of work in this area. And it's really heartbreaking for families then, especially in that cohort of babies, to know that there could have been something potentially to help them. And they will never know. We don't have the data. So this is why that study is so important, because if it doesn't show improved outcomes, then we know, and we can share that data and that counseling with families to help them understand. And hopefully there will be, more options, coming up here for things that might benefit babies, and more testing that could show this sooner as well.
So that's one question for you, because I totally believe the same way you do on education for families. So for the families who have like a mild case, are those families educated to be more attentive to their babies moving forward, because they're not going to have the same neonatal follow-up as the other babies, might have a moderate to severe case? Do they have this information that they have to watch the child closely, or share that information with the new pediatrician who's going to pick them up in the community? So how is that piece of education going to families with when the baby comes to the ICU, even for a few hours?
It is not widely being educated. So unfortunately, that is a significant gap where we are trying to push on advocacy. I've heard I have so many conversations, and everyone is so well-meaning. But I think, we as parents know, and we hear, especially like working in advocacy and support and hearing everyone's stories, just the burden of not getting the proper education and diagnosis, not thinking that because your baby is more mild that you don't need the support, right? And especially, any family that's going into the NICU, and the data shows this as well, is at risk for, mental health impacts, because it is inherently traumatic. And whatever happened before the family came through those doors in the NICU is carried through. And that is not benign. That experience to get to the NICU is not benign. And that can manifest, you don't know what someone's, psychosocial profile is and what their baggage is. They could have a whole history of trauma in their life. And this is just something that's going to manifest, in a lot of negatively impacted ways, regardless of the severity of their baby. I've heard many physicians say, well, we don't give your information unless we know that they really need it and really have, a more severe outcome. And my response is always, but that's not on you to decide who needs that. It is on the parents. Let them decide. If they're not ready for support, that's great. I will say one of the, I have had also people say, well, we had a less affected family say they weren't ready for support. And I said, this is the most beautiful thing, because almost 12 years ago, there was no support in the NICU. There was no support out of the NICU unless you're Googling like we did at 2 a.m. To find people. And I think one of the biggest wins in advocacy and support in this is to have families know that if they want support, it's there. And that's okay if they choose not to participate, or they come at whenever they're ready. We have families that come to us 6 years later, 8 years later, and they say, we've had your pamphlet hidden. I was afraid that something would happen. We're seeing this in childhood. I'm really needing support. Or I joined, and the first couple of years were, a lot better, and I felt like I didn't need support, and now I'm back and need support. Or I'm going on to have another child, and I'm terrified of that. I want to connect with others. So I think, the empowerment piece and being really trauma informed, the trauma informed care principle of empowering families with choice and voice. And if we're really going to talk about trauma informed care, which we do a lot in family centered care and family integrated care and in the, scope of the NICU, we really need to ensure that we are not making choices for families about things as what we feel is, should be support for anyone with this diagnosis or anyone that's premature, that those families are able to make that decision. And from our side, we need to make sure that we're providing support that is accessible, that is in their first language, that is trauma informed, that is, making sure were sensitive to our, our marginalized communities and things like that. So that's, really where it's a long-winded way of answering your question. But I strongly feel that this disparity of this perception that because someone has a less affected kid in the NICU, that their family doesn't need support is very misguided. And we see the negative impacts of that.
Absolutely. I can totally relate to the experience of our families here, because they feel sometimes, oh, this baby they sailed through the ICU, was a late preterm baby, only spent a few weeks here, a few days. Like, those families are just as affected by families like me who is 5 months in the ICU.
Right.
Like, we know the impact, as you mentioned, coming to the ICU, having a baby taken away from you for whatever reason that is, it's a trauma. And we have to acknowledge that. And it's up to the family to decide whether they need support at the moment, or maybe they're going to need later. Because I didn't know I had PTSD until very recent, when my therapist diagnosed me when I was talking about going to emergency room with my son for 11 years. Yeah. So it took me that many years to realize, oh, I think I have that. Right. So yes, it stays with us. And I need to applaud you for your work, Betsy, because what you're doing is absolutely phenomenal. It's so great to see the map of the world where you are reaching families, and it's really spectacular what you're doing. Outstanding work. And I really want to bring you back when you have more information, more treatments, and more research done, to really always shine a light for families. And I'm very grateful that you will accept our invitation to join us here this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And to all of you watching us live today, thank you for joining us. And I want to give a special thanks to our sponsor, AstraZeneca, for making education sessions like this one possible. And just a reminder, if you missed part of today's session, head over to canadianpreemies.org. I'm going to share a website here to see this episode and all past editions of the Preemie Chats. We have over 300 sessions there with a variety of topics. And there you also find many resources and support options available. And you'll also be reminded that CPBF is a charitable organization and depends on support to continue its important work. Consider how you can support CPBF in its mission to empower families of premature babies in every step of their journey. Together, we can create a brighter future for all preemies and their families. And we'll see you again next Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Stay well.